Hi guys, it's Blackie and welcome back to the channel. Okay, in my recent video I showed where my good friend William Collins, the Mad Knife Wizard, presented me with a Case 2X Granddaddy Barlow. And I wanted to take this opportunity to talk about the difference between a sharpened and a polished edge. Okay? Surgical tools, scalpels, things like that are polished edges. They're not just sharp. The edge has been polished like a mirror. So there's the least amount of friction as it cuts. Okay? Now in most of my work I don't have polished knives. I mean, my belt knives and things that I use are a nice robust edge. They work very, very well. But I don't really need a polished edge that much. But you can use them when you want to cut something and get the absolute cleanest cut and the smoothest. Now understand, polished edges are fragile because they can be scratched up. When you take your knife and you use a stone or you use whatever and you sharpen it, you have put scratches into it and it's a nice sharp edge, and part of that sharpness is the scratches. Okay, but if you hone and strop simply being taking a piece of leather and drawing it, I have talked about how that will take those fibers that you would see under a microscope, of the actual fibers of the metal that are like this, or like saw teeth, and you're going to kind of shine them up. Not necessarily get rid of them, but shine them up, make them even sharper. Okay? And so that it is not as much as a saw, is it more of a polished edge. And you can always tell a polished edge because you get up there and it looks like it's a mirror. Even if the blade itself is kind of dullish, that edge, there is a satin, that's sharpened, and then there's like a mirror shining. That is polished. How you get a polished edge, because just honing it on a piece of leather like that will do some. Smooth leather will do a little more. Now, a good friend of mine presented me this at a gathering last year, and it is simply a piece of hardwood with a piece of leather glued to it. And what I've done is gone to Harbor Freight and got polishing compound green. Now there's multiple colors of this, and I want to thank Mr. Rubin for pointing out that they had this, because the hunk I had was about like that much. And in it is a stick. Now this is very much like chalk. In fact, regular old chalk like you used on blackboards is usable for this, but it depends on the grit and the texture. This green polishing compound is used for high polish finish on copper, brass, stainless steel, and steel. Okay? Now what you're going to do is you're going to take it, and onto that leather you're simply going to rub it, and this will transfer a fine grit of it onto the leather. Now you're going to take your knife and you're going to draw back toward the back of the knife. Long, smooth, fluid, right on that edge. And what it does is it acts like 2,000 or 3,000, it depends on the grit, but like 2,000 or 3,000 sandpaper, and will polish that edge just like a mirror. It will get sharper and sharper and sharper. Now it is also a little more fragile, because now that it is polished and so shiny, it has very little friction when you get it fully polished. In this case, the blade is high polished, see? That means it has very little friction. What that means in English is, let's say I've got a hunk of meat up here, a steak. I can put it and make a nice, smooth, clean cut, and the meat doesn't drag on the blade because it's smooth, it's polished. When we used to cut deer steaks and things like that, often we would take the actual knife blade, and it would be a polished blade like this with a polished edge, and we'd actually run a little bit of oil on it. We'd actually put a little bit of, you know, fine olive oil or something on it, so that when it cut through the meat, there wasn't even hardly any suction, and it would just beautiful clean cut. So and that's when you're cutting up something. It's going to be pretty, but you want a nice even cut. So for meat cutting, a polished edge is almost always better. For fine detail carving, a polished edge is better, because with that I can make very clean, smooth cuts. Now, once you get it to that polished edge, you're not going to go back to the stone to sharpen. You're going to come back to this hone to hone it. So I will hone it until it is as sharp as I want it. And I'm using it for my project. I'm cutting or whatever. If it starts to not cut as well as I want, it's starting to drag a little bit, I stop, I come back to this. And then I add a little bit more polish to it. Depending on what I'm cutting is how long it's going to cut before it starts to dull. Now, of course, I could sit here and whittle for hours and hours or whatever, depending on the steel. But for cutting something really fine and thin, you see demonstrations where they take paper and sit it up there, folded up paper, and they just go, it goes right through the paper, like it's like a laser beam. That's a polished edge. Now you can of course get a polished edge by adding a little slurry to the top of a standard stone and going very light and going in that slurry. You're creating this basically. But this is like $4, a piece of leather glued to some paddle or something, the hole where I can bear down and pull, works perfectly fine. Now this is also called a strop. Straight razors were stropped, because once you got it sharp enough to shave, you didn't go back to the stone until years later. You always stropped it, so that if it was cutting and it started to get a little bit draggy on your face, you'd go back to the strop. That's the reason you always saw a laser. That's the reason you always saw a straight razor and a strop. That's all there is to it. Just that right there. Now, safety concern. Oh yeah. When you polish an edge like that, remember, we reduced friction. What does that mean in English? You go up here and go to slide your thumb up that, you will be cut before you realize it's cutting. You know, I have polished an edge on a knife before. I had a good friend of mine, Jeff, who he had a diving knife, and he wanted me to make it as sharp as I could make it. And so I took a file and I re-beveled it, and then I went to my stones, and after a course of about 2 weeks working on it, about every other night after work, I had honed it with compound and leather, and I'd stropped it up to where it was as sharp as I could make it. And Jeff, I just handed him the knife, was looking at it, and was not careful. He did not respect it. A polished edge slices in with very little resistance in flesh. Remember that. That's one of them things where you, and you look down and suddenly you realize you got blood running and you didn't feel yourself get cut. That's what a polished edge will do for you. So you must respect the edge. Always, 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 always. Think of it like a laser that's going to burn you if you go sideways to it. You can pull from the back forward. Never push in, never slide up. Don't do any of this sliding on top of the fingernail stuff. Simply take it from the back and push away. You can tell. Put it like that and just lightly let it catch the skin. You can tell. That's all you need to do. There is no need to bear down, because it's going to bite if you do. Jeff not paying attention and not respecting that edge, he did like that, and when he did, a big hunk of his finger just flipped over. It went to bone and went almost to the tip. And a section about that much of his finger just flopped forward. He didn't even feel it cut him. It was that laser clean. We realized, put it back, got pressure onto it. I put a pressure bandage on it, and he went to the ER. And they cleaned out the wound and said it looked like a surgical cut. It was so clean they were able to hook it all back together and it healed back. There's a scar, but he didn't lose use. The meat actually went back together. It was that clean a cut. So, in conclusion, polishing compound, and there's different layers. You can practice this. A piece of leather. You can get scrap leather from the shoe shops. You can order leather pieces offline. A piece of wood to glue it onto. Something we used to do in the past is we would go get the paint stirring sticks for the 5-gallon bucket. Not the little ones, the long or thicker. And we would cut them in half, make 2 pieces because they're about that long. And we would glue leather to it and put 2 different kind of compounds on it. We might also take Elmer's glue and glue wet dry sandpaper to the other side. Say a 2000 grit or something like that is a relative coarse for this. But with polishing compound, a sharp knife to begin with and some sort of strop, you can polish an edge and make it far sharper than it was before. But respect that edge. Hope you've enjoyed this. Hope you've learned something. Please put down there in the comments any thoughts you'd like to share. I'd love to hear from you. Till next time, guys, I'm Blackie wishing you safe journeys. Have a great day, guys.